This week in the enterprise security news, SureCloud launches Cyber Resilience Assessment Solution. Blackpoint Cyber launches a 365 defense for Microsoft Office 365. Endace and Palo Alto secure a partnership on the XSOAR-enabled accelerated forensics of cyber threats. Wow, that's a mouthful. Zscaler acquires Edgewise Networks. WatchGuard Technologies completes the acquisition of Panda Security, and more. In the second segment, Alyssa Miller, application security advocate for Snyk, to talk about unraveling your software bill of materials. In our final segment, we welcome Aaron Reinhardt, CTO and co-founder of Verica, Casey Rosenthal, CEO and co-founder of Verica, to talk about security chaos engineering. So stay tuned for all that and more in this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The Viavi Solutions Observer Platform provides SecOps teams a powerful combination of comprehensive data for threat hunting and incident response that includes wire data analytics and enriched flow records. Using pure, unaltered packet and net flow, Observer presents views across the entire IT infrastructure with threat alert features including scope, impact, and advanced traffic profiling. Teams can use automated workflows to dive into high-fidelity network evidence and more quickly resolve issues, minimizing impact on customers, users, and business operations. Learn more about the Viavi Network Security Solution and download free resources at securityweekly.com/Viavi. That's VIAVI. You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Welcome to episode 186 of Enterprise Security Weekly for June 3rd, 2020. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. John Strand. John, welcome.
Hey, I think it's some kind of record. I think I've been on the show for like 3-4 weeks. This is cool.
Dude, it's awesome. It's awesome. Mr. Matt Alderman is here with us as well. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Yes, 4 weeks in a row, John. We always love your insight. So people miss you. So it's great that you're back on for these live streams.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
A couple of quick announcements before we get into it. Layer 8 is going virtual. The conference will be held on Saturday, June 6th. Security Weekly listeners do save $20 off by visiting layer8conference.com using the promo code Security Weekly, all one word, by selecting when you select your ticket type. Actually, before you select your ticket type, please consider supporting Layer 8 or one of the partner organizations when you purchase your ticket. You can give some extra money to nonprofit organizations, charitable organizations in the process. We will also be, Security Weekly will be on our own Layer 8 Discord channel on their Discord server, answering questions and maybe doing some contests. Join the Security Weekly mailing list and receive your invite to our community Discord server by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe and clicking join the list. Alrighty, on to the news. Where there was some debate before, we were already like digging into it before the show started. So where do you guys want to start?
Let's start at the very beginning, security scorecard. So I've got a question for you two. Has there been any indications from these companies that they are successful in actually predicting companies that would get compromised? I have a real hard time with these companies, and I will get to why here in a second. But these companies basically look at a corporation. They're able to look at the footprint, IP fingerprint, IP footprint, do SSL certificates, check DNS configuration, IP reputation, and then they come out with this thing that says, yes, they have a good score, they're secure, or they're not. And I'm skeptical.
So a good reason to be skeptical. Yeah. I am as well. I mean, they collect some interesting data, but I don't think that data is enough to produce a score. We talk about this on Security and Compliance Weekly. Risk is in scoring stuff is an interesting game, right? And Yeah, I come out with a score says you're a C rating. Well, what input goes into that? Yeah, and in the vendors or the companies can debate certain aspects of that and improve their score, but it's not that simple, John. Right? I do like some of the data they collect. When I was at Tenable, actually, I looked at trying to OEM the security scorecard data because they had some really relevant data that I thought would provide some additional contextual information into Tenable's platform that we could use to do some prioritization. But I didn't care about their scoring mechanism.
See, see what you just mentioned there is tying the information you get from like a scorecard and you're correlating it with other vulnerability analysis information. That's going to be much more in depth than a company like this can do with just scanning a company. Then it starts being part of a bigger picture, but it's not the entire picture. And that's the problem I have with it is
Right.
This is being sold as this is the entire picture. This is the security health of a company. And that's just not true because everything they talk about here, folks, everything you can do for free. You can check, SSL fingerprints. You can do DNS checks. You can check if they're patched. You can do that through Shodan. IP reputation, you got a various number of blacklists, web application security. There's a number of different sites that are automatically crawling and looking for web app vulnerabilities directly off the gate. Information leakage, you can check pastebin. And then also compromised email addresses from things like Have I Been Pwned. So as near as I can tell, basically these companies take everything that a pen test firm does in recon and they package it. And then they resell it. And I believe that there's value there, but I don't necessarily believe it's the level of value that they're selling for the cost that they're selling it for.
Yeah, and two things. First, garbage in, garbage out, right? So whatever they're checking for has to be quality information, right? There is definitely on the quality scale some differences between the information that you can gather from various sources, right? And then there's just the gaps, like what information are they not collecting. And I'm really kind of intrigued how the threat intelligence, and I think that's a really encompassing term, has kind of morphed and changed. And I look at how people are using various threat intelligence services, and some are doing a really great job. So this week I had the opportunity of doing some brief research on, when we talk about what's happening in the world today, pandemics, and, now there are riots and looting as well. Those are all fed through security at some point, depending on your organization. And some of the questions being posed this week were, well, how do we know if there's a threat, physical or not? What tools do we have to determine that? There's some pretty cool threat intelligence companies that are monitoring your organization for things like that. And if you use them correctly, I think they can provide a lot of value. But that also means validating the information before you start taking an action to some degree. Some people are, have multiple feeds and they're going, well, if I get this from this feed and I have to correlate it from this other feed, and then I can go have someone take an action, right?
Well, it also boils down to, I got a webcast tomorrow where I'm talking about the difference between durable threat intelligence feeds and ephemeral threat intelligence feeds. And this also feeds into the pyramid of pain. If you're buying a threat intelligence feed and it's purely IP address, hash, and domain names, and you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for that, it's time to get a new threat intelligence feed. If they're actually getting into TTPs and they're actually breaking down, if you're looking at something like Mimikatz, instead of doing a string-based analysis looking for the word Mimikatz, but it's jumping into what dynamic link libraries are loaded in which order, now you're starting to get something that has more value. Right. But it all requires your company to have that ability to ingest that properly.
Absolutely. There's some cool ones out there that can give you kind of a heads up on physical threats as well, which is really, really interesting. So where are we going next?
Let's do Dragos. Since we're talking about threat intel, let's talk about a company that does it. And I think, honestly, the right way and specific, like they're highly targeted in the ICS industry. And they've got a new platform that they just released. And I did have somebody come out and basically call me out on Twitter. And they're like, you always talk about Dragos just because you're friends with Rob M. Lee. Look, Rob M. Lee and I have had our disagreements, completely unrelated to Dragos or anything. I do consider Rob to be a friend without question, but the fact is, Dragos is kind of awesome in the ICS space. To be completely blunt, it's pretty cool.
And I think, John, you've kind of seen the progression of their product as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
Over time, and gotten little tidbits, which is one of the reasons why I added this story, because I'm like, they're constantly improving their platform, right?
Always. And I think that high level of focus that they drive on that platform is probably something I would like to see most vendors do. Instead of somebody saying we're all things to everyone all the way across the board, Dragos has that one mission statement. I think it's something as simple as just, save civilization, but they're very hyper focused on the ICS community, and they watch very closely to what the attackers are doing. They have the world's best, I think, IR team for responding to these types of attacks, and I think it all feeds back into the platform too.
And what you see in this announcement, John, a little bit is they have really strong incident response capabilities, as you said, and that was really kind of their differentiation in the ICS space. But now you see in this release improvements in what others would focus on, the cyber resilience, the inventory, that visibility side. You see enhancements there, really to start to balance the capabilities out, I think, a little broader. Where they were heavy IR before, they're providing a lot more capabilities in the ICS space, where others were focused more just on the inventory, cyber resilience side of the equation.
Well, and part of what's been going on with Dragos is whenever you take a company like Dragos that explodes as fast as they did, and you're doing IR and you're working on a platform and you're doing all these different things, the challenge ultimately becomes how do you tie all of those things together? So your IR consultancy is actually feeding the TTPs into the platform, and the platform's able to actually detect those. And then they've been doing a lot with the MITRE ATT&CK ICS framework and then tying that into it as well. If you look at when Dragos started to where the industry is now, there's been this explosive growth in understanding attacks against the ICS community. And honestly, that has a lot to do with Dragos and their team. But I think that this particular release is probably the first time I've seen them start to tie all that stuff together really, really well. And that's not digging on them in the past. It's just, holy crap, there's been a lot that's happened over the past year or so. So now they're trying to bring all of that together with this, I think it's 1.6 is the platform that's working pretty well at it.
And I think the threat intelligence, kind of going back to that, is a good use case for this situation. If you think about the software and hardware that most enterprises run, they likely have Microsoft Windows and they likely have Intel processors. So if there's threat intel, it's like, hey, people are working on exploiting Windows and exploiting things in Intel processors. It's okay, that's everyone, right? Like, it's a pretty wide attack surface. However, in the ICS space, the hardware and software in many levels is very, very specific. And if you can gain some advanced intelligence that, hey, look, someone's looking into step 7, you might want to pay attention to that, right? Because, I think that's a good use case for very specific threat intelligence that can be useful.
Okay, so let's do a little bit of inside baseball. As I said, Rob and I have had arguments and disagreements on things. So I'll tell the listeners this little story. So years ago, Paul, you remember active defense, cyber deception, what we've been doing with the book and the class of Black Hat. Yeah. So Rob has a different vision of what active defense is. Okay. So Rob's vision of active defense is basically you're learning what the adversaries are doing, and then you're dynamically and actively incorporating that back into the defense approach. Whereas you and I, whenever we set out to define active defense, it was really about setting up defensive components that would basically make the attacker's life actively more difficult. So there was a little bit of disagreement between him and I as far as like terminologies and things like that. The thing that I think is great is what you just mentioned, and what you're seeing here is exactly where Rob had that definition of active defense, right, where he's literally doing that, where he's taking all of these different things from IR, he's taking all of these different things from threat intelligence feeds, and he's bolstering in the defensive platform. And that was stuff that Rob has been talking about well before Dragos, but you're actually seeing that company start to walk that walk and doing it very well.
That's awesome. That's a great, I think, assessment and summary of what's going on there. So cool. We want to get into some funding and acquisitions.
Oh my God.
I do. Zscaler has acquired Edgewise Networks, and I'm so happy for the team over there. We've known them for quite some time, from fairly early on, I think, in Edgewise's history. And when we first really uncovered what they were doing, we were like, wow, that's awesome. Like, everyone should be using that, right? So when I saw this announcement this morning, I was, congratulations to the team. I'm so happy for you. and not surprised, really. I was like, that kind of makes complete sense, right? And even the acquisition players, right? Zscaler is going to, I think, do great. It poised to do great things with Edgewise.
Well, especially with the climate as things are now, right?
Yeah, moving to the cloud.
Moving things to the cloud, when you're talking about Zscaler or the products that they have, when you talk about Edgewise, I don't think that you could see many companies that were as well positioned for like the world going off a cliff as like Zscaler, and Edgewise just makes sense.
Yeah, and it helps them. Go ahead, Matt.
But Zscaler's 2 for 2. They bought Cloud Needy first, Paul, right?
Oh, yeah. So they bought two companies that are very close to Security Weekly. Yes.
Very close to us, right? And so you've got them first making the investment in the cloud, then the investment in Edgewise right behind that, which really brings the application with the cloud components from Cloud Needy. It puts Zscaler in a really good position in this environment. And I think these are both very, very smart acquisitions for them to extend their existing capabilities into these new environments.
Yeah, I that's it's a huge, when I think about the capabilities of Cloud Needy and auditing what can happen in the cloud, and then Edgewise basically locking down your application, not just on the IP level, but as we've had many conversations with them, locking down the application, the process level. You can only run this Python script, right? And if you try and modify it or run some other Python script, nope, you're denied. That's an awesome level of security for enterprises.
And it's hard to do. It's really hard to do.
Yes. And I'm anxious to see what Edgewise is going to do now with the larger resources as well, because Peter and company they have great vision as well. So fun stuff. What were some of the other? There was another couple in there.
Psychotic.
Teammate, Psychotic. Teammate was the big one. I was just like, holy crap, these guys are everywhere.
Who's that?
Yeah.
Teammate out of Israel.
Oh yeah. They raised $104 million.
But they've got big backers. I mean, I think Cisco and Microsoft, and you got some big backers there, really enhancing that fund to make more investments. You know, they're going to bring out some really cool startups out of Israel that Palo Alto will just end up buying.
Yeah.
Yep. But this, I'd still like to know. I think that there needs to be a book at some point written, like what the hell has happened in Israel over the past few years. Like, what is it about the economy and what they've done for IT and IT security that has made them actually stand out and just explode as much as they have? If you're,
I
think we lost John.
We did.
Lost his internet. He's making a great point, though, right? I mean, we've seen a ton of very awesome startups coming out of Israel. And I think a lot of it has to do with the kind of the culture of Israel. I mean, they are surrounded by a lot of enemies. Everybody spends 2 years in the military at a minimum.
Most of the founders come out of 8200.
Exactly. They're coming out of high stress, intelligence areas. They understand how to defend. And so I think they just have these really great skill sets that apply to our industry extremely well.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well said. John, you're back.
Yeah, I dropped off for a second. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Little internet glitch here and there.
It happens.
I want to see your book. I want to see that book too, John, by the way.
Right.
Okay.
Agreed. Synack has raised $52 million. Which is interesting.
So I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious about the Synack and this concept of crowdsourced red teaming, right? So, John, go.
Yeah. But I want to say that Synack is different. Okay, if you look at a lot of these, different companies, they let their people submit anonymously, and I think that there's a lot of problems with that. What Synack is doing is they actually do a certain level of vetting of the testers. So you just can't show up and just start submitting bugs. You have to go through a vetting process, and that's huge. The other thing about Synack that is interesting is I think it was last year or 2 years ago, they realized that just doing the crowdsourced bug bounty program wasn't going to get them where they wanted to go. So then they basically started moving into general pen testing as well. Now, the way that their pen testing model works is basically all the people that are doing work for them are 1099. They're vetted 1099s. And I have some very, very, very good friends that do work with Synack, and they love working with Synack. Synack is great if you're a highly technical person and you want to do something in the evening or on the weekends to make some additional cash. You can totally do that with Synack. That's really cool. Here's the problem I have, and I'm not a money person, so Matt, I'm leaving it up to you. $52 million? This seems like it's a Silicon Valley, like, you mean I could have taken less money? I have very, very big concerns about taking that much funding and whether or not the market can actually bear that much from one company.
And this comes down to the Shark Tank question, right? So what are you going to do if you get the money, right? The answer to that question is going to tell us, the folks at Synack, what their vision is to be able to grow and produce revenue that will use that $52 million to propel the company to the next level.
But remember, this $52 million is a Series D. They had already raised 60 before this, right? So now they're $112 million in. And when you get into the article, it talks about where they're going to spend this, right? They want to expand internationally. That takes some capital. They got to get some folks overseas. They got to open offices. And then I think a lot of it has to do with probably more recruiting of talent to continue to drive their model. But international expansion takes money.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember about what Synack is doing that's interesting, right, and this is coming from a pen test firm owner, is if I hire a pen tester, I've got to pay their salary, I've got to pay their benefits, I've got to pay all of these different things. Synack has, 1,500 people in their network right now, and they don't have to, they're under no obligation to feed those people on a month-to-month basis. They're basically using security as a gig economy. So that's kind of brilliant because their overhead just isn't quite there, right? They're just not going to have that because they don't have to pay these people. So it's interesting what they're going to do with this cash. I'm very, very curious, but I do know that Synack, Synack has some very outstanding talent working for them. So this is interesting. I'm going to watch it. I just hope to God this isn't one of those things where they take all this money and then 2 years from now they're like, they got bought by McAfee because the investment company wanted their money back. That's going to be a problem.
That would be a problem. What's interesting is you look at other gig economy companies like Lyft and Uber and others, right? For the longest time, all the analysts were trying to figure out, why aren't these guys making money, right? They don't have a lot of overhead. All the drivers are contractors, right? Synack has a very similar model. As long as they invest wisely in the technology platforms, continue to keep their overhead down, you can see where a structure like this could be highly profitable and successful. I just don't want them to fall into the trap of the Lyfts and Ubers where they were spending money that was just crazy and couldn't get those profitability numbers in check.
But this also comes back to another core problem. I just got to thinking, Paul loves the Shark Tank thing. What is stopping other companies from doing this?
Yeah.
Like, is Synack literally the only company in the world that can do this? Can BugCrowd do what Synack is doing? Absolutely. Can Luda? Is that something that they could jump in and do? Hell yes. So the problem is, as soon as they develop a model that's going to be successful, they're immediately going to have a tremendous amount of competition in that space as well. So this is a concern. Like if I was writing this check, I would say, great, if you're ahead of the race right now, in quote unquote bug bounties, which is a little bit different than what Synack does, how do you maintain that edge and how do you move it forward without somebody showing up and eating your lunch?
It's an interesting analogy to Uber and Lyft because if you've ever taken an Uber, right, sometimes the driver also has the Lyft symbol in their car as well. And there's nothing stopping a tester for doing that, the same thing with Synack and doing contract work for another company. Now, the more concerning thing is if you talk to some people who've used Uber, especially in areas where they're not as populated, not as many Uber drivers, sometimes you get the same person and you form a relationship with them and you're like, hey, do you just want to drive for me? Like I'll just give you cash under the table.
Dude,
we don't have to give anything.
That exact thing. I got drivers in different cities that I have their cell phone number, and I just call them.
Right? But the same thing could happen in Synack's model.
Right, where you just have that pen tester do your pen test and you bypass the system. Right, it's possible. The other thing is, remember back in the days, Paul, Tenable's like, well, we're not worried about a new vulnerability management company. Barrier to entry is too high. Barrier to entry is not that high here in a crowdsourced model, right? So that is a challenge.
Yep, it is. So I want to get to one more like before we call it, and I've got to get onto another meeting at the top of the hour. The AttackIQ thing.
That's the article I had up.
Is it possible for us to get somebody from AttackIQ on to talk about what this actually is? Because we were talking about it looks like, you know, they're coming up with some flexibility in the library of, they're kind of going with what Scythe does already, where you can choose the different types of techniques that you're going to use and you can create that chain dynamically. That's how I'm reading this. Am I reading that incorrectly?
No, it sounds that, I mean, especially the bullet, you know, allow teams to take advantage of MITRE ATT&CK, and open platform enables TTPs to be tailored or test or defined. That's to me what that says. Yeah, is what you said, John. Yeah, for sure.
So here's the problem that I'm running into with not just AttackIQ. AttackIQ is cool. Cyberthreats cool. All of these companies are cool. The problem that I'm running into right now, Paul and Matt, I always say I don't see this company. I don't see this company in our pen tests. I don't see this. I do see these BAS vendors, and I do see them showing up. The issue that we're seeing now is that most of these vendors are coming up with very rigid scripts to do the attack emulation or simulation. And the attacks are incredibly rigid, right? Like they'll just use PowerShell, or they use a handful of scripts. So they'll do CMD//C versus CMD//K. And slight modifications can actually bypass the detects that come put in place. So I would encourage you, whenever you're playing with these tools, don't treat these vendors as a MITRE ATT&CK bingo card. That is horrible. Like, oh, they got this technique, this technique, this technique. Okay, good, bingo. You really want to look at these products on how can you actually inform the defense to be able to detect these attacks moving beyond that kind of ephemeral, network threat intelligence. Like, oh, well, if we look for this string, Mimikatz, we'll detect Mimikatz. Be very, very careful. The other thing is if you're looking at MITRE, whenever they start doing comparisons of endpoint vendors, they tend to use products like the most recent one that they just did. They used Cobalt Strike and they used PowerShell Empire. And unfortunately, what we saw at BHIS is we saw this huge spike in the number of vendors that could detect Cobalt Strike. And all of a sudden, Cobalt Strike stopped working. But as soon as we went off that path, we were able to bypass and still work. So we have to be careful on how we're using MITRE, everybody. It is not a signature database. It is not a bingo card. Don't treat it as such.
But I love that advice, John, because what it means is I think, have this kind of notion that I get one of these tools, right? All the tools you just mentioned, someone in the BAS space, and it's unsuccessful. I'm like, great. I don't have to worry about that, right? I just have to worry about the successes that these tools have and address those issues. But what you're saying is, no, when it is caught, or not, when it's caught, rather, that I need to go back and then rerun the test with maybe slight variations on all of these techniques until I can bypass, right?
And so MITRE is working with that, by the way. MITRE is getting into sub-techniques. They're moving to, instead of just a technique, they're moving into sub-techniques, and that was desperately needed.
Yep, agreed.
And by the way, you guys should be watching this a lot closer because you guys came from the vulnerability management space. It's just a matter of time before BAS has to be integrated with vulnerability management. And what I'm very curious to see happen is with vulnerabilities, we were doing all of these different checks with like Nestle, Nazzle, and we were running checks against systems. We're going to be in the exact same place with the BAS space here quickly. Yeah. And whichever vendor can incorporate with the BAS vendor the fastest, I'm calling it right now, is going to become that leader in the vulnerability management space.
It was one of the research projects Paul and I actually had when SafeBreach first came out. Remember? SafeBreach came out. We were like,
the first
what are they doing? How do we integrate it? Because they were like one of the first ones in this space.
Yep. Yeah, interesting stuff.
All right.
Any final ones you guys want to cover?
Just Thycotic and Onion ID. And I mean, that's an exit for Ron, because I know Ron was in Onion ID. Yep. Thycotic needed to do something in the cloud SaaS space to keep up with CyberArk and Conjure and all the things CyberArk's doing. So, great exit for Onion ID. That's a couple known entities got acquired this week.
Yes. And Onion ID was similar to Conjure?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it was doing privileged access for both cloud and SaaS platforms. So it had that. So it had some of those hooks into those platforms. I think that's why Thycotic bought it, because they needed an answer to non-on-prem systems. Yep. And Conjure was kind of that acquisition stuff that CyberArk made a couple of years ago that has been heavily integrated into the CyberArk solution. We interviewed them a couple of weeks ago on aspects of that. So this is something they needed to do, I think, because now we're going to see, I think we're already seeing it, more and more systems not on-prem. That means you got to have some of these additional capabilities. They acquired Onion ID to get it, it looks like.
It's also an interesting integration into Palo Alto Networks Cortex XSOAR and Endace forensics tool, which is kind of interesting. That's the Demisto acquisition by Palo Alto. In case you're behind, like many of us, on terminology of all the things that have, acquisitions that have happened. So I thought that was kind of neat as well. Cool. With that will conclude the news segment for this week on Enterprise Security Weekly. Stay tuned. Alyssa Miller coming up next.